Welcome to Career Tools. This week, interviews are not a two-way street, despite what you want them to be. Here we go. Folks, we're constantly getting questions about resumes. It is now September of 2014. The market is warming up. Google searches for careers are up 30 to 40% in just the last few weeks, and your resume needs to be squared away. We highly recommend you get a copy of our resume workbook, which takes you through everything you need to do in your resume in incredibly detailed fashion. Check it out. Okay, so Wendy, you and I read a lot of career advice. I actually enjoy reading it. I really do, even when I disagree. I don't enjoy reading management advice that I disagree with because I think I just think there's a bigger risk. But a lot of career advice, I enjoy reading. It's often wrong. And one thing that's often wrong is this thing that, hey, interviews are a two-way street. You're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, exactly. One of my favorite phrases, yeah, no. Now, there is a kernel of truth in it, but it confuses because it's not specific and because it panders to a person who wants to know about the company, who wants to assert themselves, who doesn't want to be on the defensive, doesn't want to be not in charge. It panders to that thought, but in fact, it's misleading guidance, okay? And it causes people to behave in unacceptable ways. So tell us what guidance we have on interviews not being a two-way street. I just think it's a funny title. Yeah, not a two-way street. I would love for someone that I interviewed to think it's a two-way street. I mean, I really would.
Yeah, I've done that. And I kept my smile and I answered the questions. And then I said no, you're not coming here. Yeah. So the first thing is don't interview the interviewer. The second thing is assess the company, which is what you want to do, and get an offer first.
Yeah, that's the whole key. I'm going to say this again at the end of the cast if I remember to do it. But folks, there are two parts to interviews: getting offers and taking offers. When you're trying to get an offer, it doesn't do you any good to know all kinds of things about the company. First of all, you're not going to be smart enough to adjust on the knowledge. And if you don't get an offer, you won't have the opportunity to take that offer. So we don't want to interview the interviewer. Tell us more.
So that's what the impression that a lot of these articles give is that you are interviewing the interviewer to see if you want to work there as much as they're interviewing you to see if they want you to work there. And that's not the case. In an interview, you can ask questions and you should ask questions at the end. That's one of the things that we tell you, but it's not an equal conversation. It's not, you don't get as many questions as they do. You don't get to ask anything you want in the same way that they don't get to ask anything they want either. Most people won't ask you blatantly, did you steal money from your last company? Because it's just not a good interview question, right? So the conversation is already restricted. It's just that you get even less than they do. And the things that a lot of people want to ask are things that are kind of, I want to say the word rude. They're not rude, I guess, but, they're things that are about things that are really important to you.
Right.
And right now, the interviewer doesn't care about what's important to you. They only care about what's important to the company, which is, can you do this job?
Yeah, I've often quoted Shel Silverstein's poem called God's Wheel. It shows a kid who comes across God who, in the cartoon that Shel Silverstein draws associated with the poem, there's a picture of a white bearded guy on the top of the earth, basically with the steering wheel stuck into the North Pole. And the kid says, "What's that?" And God says, "That's the wheel I steer the world with. Do you want to give it a try?" And the kid says, "Sure. Where do I sit? How much do I get? When's lunch? When can I quit?" God says, "Give me back my wheel. You're not ready yet." Meaning, you start asking about what's in it for you, a la the Field of Dreams, and you discover that that's not the purpose of the interview, certainly not the purpose of life either. Now look, guys, there's nothing wrong with recognizing you need to know a lot about the company. We respect that. We want you to. We want you to make a good decision. We don't want there to be a Romeo and Juliet where the company likes you and you like them, but you don't get there. That's a terrible outcome. We want a good hire for the right reasons. But there's a time for questions. And that's why we're going to talk about getting an offer first. but a lot of us ask questions. I'm sorry. I'm going to change that just because I've been interviewed a few times. A lot of you, I don't do this. A lot of you think you get to interview the interviewer, you get to ask questions. For example, could you ask an interview about quality of life or morale at a company? You could. But look, no interviewer is going to tell you it's a terrible place to work. And it's a yes or no question, or a question that doesn't deliver you any information will be terribly helpful. But think about it from a time perspective, folks, because most people dread interviews, but they realize, wow, that went fast. You have wasted a question. Okay. Any question, by the way, about the company in its entirety is by definition wasted. Okay. But in addition, you've asked a question that didn't help you. The purpose of this question was to help you make a decision. But more importantly, even if the question had taught you something useful, you are now taking time out of the portion of the interview that's designed for the recruiter to learn about your strengths in order to determine whether or not to hire you, and talked about the company. If it takes you a minute or a minute and a half, or it's an open-ended question like, tell me your feelings about the morale, and they take 3 or 4 minutes, that's 3 or 4 minutes. And if you're lucky, it's an hour interview, but many of them are 30 or 45 minutes. You've taken 3 or 4 minutes. You know, what is that? It's 5% of the interview that you don't get to talk about what you're good at. You don't get to ask a different question that shows you're knowledgeable. You may not get to close at the end of the interview. And you've probably hit a raw nerve with the interviewer in the sense that interviewers don't want questions like that. Now, let me make an aside here. There are some interviewers who'll tell you, no, those are fine. Those questions are fine. Folks, they're telling you that because they've already ruled you out.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I'd tell you that was fine in the interview. I wouldn't hire you.
Sure. If I'm 15 minutes in the interview and I've decided I'm not going to hire you, no, let's not put that in my context. The vast majority of interviewers, and by the way, there are professional interviewers, and there are HR people, and there are hiring managers, and then there are potential peers of yours. 80% of them are not prepared. They might make a snap judgment in 15 minutes. If you then spend the rest of the time asking them questions that are interesting conversationally and makes it feel like a conversation, they're going to think they gave you a good interview, when in fact what you don't know is they already said no to you. The chance that your questions are going to make an appreciable difference in their opinion of you is probably 5%. Now, that's 5% we want to do well at. But when a recruiter says, no, that question's completely fine, they're not being truthful with you about what the question said about you to them. They're just being truthful that, yeah, any question is okay because I want you to feel like you can ask me anything. What they're not telling you is, that question is fine, but I dinged you for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't get to ask in the interview, how am I doing?
That's something that people get advice about, and I hate it.
Let me change that and say, you're welcome to ask that, but you're going to get the same answer you get anytime you ask somebody, how's Project X? The person's going to say, fine. It's inappropriate to ask, and nobody is required to give you an honest, helpful answer to a question that's inappropriate. You know, the guidance I give is you're only required to give an honest answer to questions to which you're required to give an answer. If somebody asks you a question that's outside of the realm of the contextual appropriateness of the interview, you don't have to answer truthfully. Hey, are you going to give me an offer? Well, we'll see. Or it's looking good. In both cases, they could say that in the event they were going to say no to you. And people walk out saying, oh, I'm certain I got an offer because he says, well, it's looking good. Yeah, I don't think so. So, sorry, a little bit of a rant there, Wendy.
That's okay. I'm not going to guarantee that I'm not going to go off on one later either.
Yeah.
The other thing about those questions is no one is going to tell you the truth. So you shouldn't even be asking. You're wasting your time and you're not getting the truth. And asking your network who will tell you the truth is much better. Don't interview the interviewer, interview your network about those things.
Yeah. I mean, could you ask about your manager's management style? You could. you're not going to get a truthful answer. First of all, nobody knows anybody else's managerial style other than an interviewer would say about someone else, oh, he's well liked, he's a good guy, he's successful, he wouldn't be a manager if he wasn't, kind of thing. And if you ask the manager, him or herself, most people don't have a clear idea of what their management style is. We think they ought to, but they don't. And so they'll probably say something like, well, I like to achieve results, try to have good relationships with my people, pretty much leave them alone, let them, trust them, show them that, I'll let them do what they want to do. And you might think that sounds good until you discover that everybody is saying to you once you get hired, I don't hear anything from this guy. I don't have any guidance. I can't get a decision, right? Mm-hmm. But is somebody going to tell you that? No, they're not.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So when it comes to interviewing the interviewer, the answer is no. Do you get to ask questions? Yes. At the end of the interview. And those questions we recommend in our interviewing series of podcasts, which is available on the website. We say, ask about the job, ask about your contribution to the role, ask about how you're going to be delivering on the role that you're going to be in. You're interviewing for a job. Only then, when you tell them by your questions that you're smart and so on, do they probably have enough information to make a decision. Once they make the decision and give you an offer, gosh, then, as we'll talk about later, you can ask. So the next thing you mentioned was assess the company.
Yeah. So instead of interrogating the interviewer about the company, we're going to assess the company from the outside, as it were. So there's two ways to do this. First, you can do a bunch of research. And thank God we have the internet. So if I'd have lived in any other age, I would have gone mental. You could type in the name of the company. I did this morning, and morale or benefits or employee reviews, all of them came up with something for the couple of companies that I chose. You can add in the location, and on Google, if you go to more, you can restrict the time. So you can say only things from the last year, so you get recent things. And I did that for one of our clients, for Daimler Trucks, and I didn't find anything about their policy for disabilities, which might be something that you're interested in. But I did find out that one of the locations that we go to for training is hiring a disability consultant. And if I was concerned about that, that would be my answer. They obviously take it seriously.
Yeah.
So you can find out an awful lot without asking the interviewer and giving away those things that are maybe on the side of things that you wouldn't normally want to give away, or things that you just don't want to ask about or shouldn't be asking about because, they hit those raw nerves.
Yeah, I think that, again, the point we're going to make next about getting an offer first, you can assess the company in ways other than interviewing the interviewer. And again, assessing the company is irrelevant to whether or not they offer you. The first part of interviewing is them evaluating you. Play that game. Play that game perfectly. I've often said that interviewing is an artificial reality designed to keep people out. Purpose of interviews is to say no. The best example I have of what interviews are like is, imagine you're a software developer and your company is not growing and there are no promotions, but you see another company growing down the road and you think, I know a lot of people over there. It's a good culture. I want to be a senior software developer and I want a chance to become a software development manager. And I feel like that company, because a rising tide lifts all boats, is going to be a better opportunity for me. So you decide you're going to leave and you're going to go over there. Fine. When you do that, when you make that decision, you go over and you interview as best you can. Okay. And you tell them everything you possibly can about why you're good for the role. And then they don't give you an offer. Well, okay. What good does it do to know about the company? Not a lot. And again, time wasted. On the other hand, if you get an offer, the moment you get an offer, right? The moment you've taken every moment you possibly can to tell them how good you are, within reason, you were not talking about bragging or being arrogant, then you get to decide. Then you get time to decide. You already have a job and you can sit back and go, okay, now let me compare apples to apples. You can't take an offer you don't get. And as hard as interviews are, it makes no sense to be wasting time in the interview. It just doesn't.
No, you've only got an hour.
Yeah, and can you really be good enough to say, oh, I don't need an hour to summarize myself. I can do it in 45 minutes. With a recruiter or an interviewer who's not very well organized, who doesn't ask good questions, no, you need every one of those minutes.
One caveat about internet reviews, just remember that the only people who write reviews are very happy or very unhappy. So whatever it says, take 20% off it.
It's not a bell curve.
No, exactly.
It's just the opposite.
Yeah. Okay, so the second place you can assess the company is using your network. You don't need to ask the interviewer or someone that you meet at the company about the company culture, because if they're interviewing, 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you whatever's on the poster in HR anyway, because they are selling the company to you as much as they're interviewing you. That's right. Part of the point of interviewing. But if you can find someone in your network who's worked there, or knows someone who works there, or knows one of the managers there, they will give you far better information. And it's guaranteed. If the managing director is a guy who yells all day, he yelled at everybody all day 3 jobs ago too. So even if you can only find out something that was about one of the people a long time previously, most of us don't change a huge amount. And certainly really bad behavior or really good behavior tends to get rewarded. And so we carry on with it.
Exactly. Okay. And we've already alluded to a bunch. We recommend you get an offer first. There's nothing wrong with interviewing. No, there's nothing wrong with learning about the company so that you can make a good decision. But there is something wrong with interviewing the interviewer, because when you're being interviewed, you don't have an offer. So our guidance is get an offer first, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's take an example. So one of the things that's often important to candidates is flexible working, whether that's because they have an elderly parent, or they're studying, or they're picking up children, or just, they were students and they can't get out of bed in the morning. And if flexible working hasn't been mentioned in all the interviews you've had, and you haven't been able to find out about it, what the company's policy generally or this manager's attitude is in specific, then once you get the offer, then you can ask about it.
Right.
But flexible working and leaving at 3 o'clock every day or 5 o'clock every day on the dot to pick up your child from daycare, even though we probably don't want this, we don't want this to be true as a society, it is true that it makes you a less valuable employee. It's a ding in the fact that you can't stay for an extra 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or you can't take over from a colleague, or you're not there when somebody expects you to be. And so you only want to talk about it after they've decided you're a great candidate.
Yeah.
At that point, they'll say, okay, you're a great candidate. Yeah, I can live with that small flaw.
Yeah. A way to think about this is, again, not until you get the offer. It's totally okay to evaluate a company in that way. But remember, there's getting the offer. And before you have an offer, the whole purpose of interviewing is evaluating you. Any interest you have in evaluating the company comes at the expense of the company evaluating you. And if we don't have enough time to make a decision, we're going to say no. If we don't have enough information to make a decision, we're going to say no. Once you get the offer, in fact, the definition of an offer, the root definition of an offer, guys, is when control passes to you. That's why offers feel so good. So when you have control, it is now time for you to evaluate them. It's time for you to start asking questions. And in fact, people like me and other executives say, this is great. He busted his tail to get us to the point where we'd be excited. But now he's not dumb enough to simply accept willy-nilly. He wants to feel good about the decision. Because he had questions and he sublimated them to the process of us learning about him, now he has to ask us some questions because it's his time, because we've offered him a job, and now it's time for him to ask questions.
Yeah. Until the offer, you're trying to persuade someone to buy your product, what you're selling, which is you. And no salesperson worth his salt tells you about all the faults of the product before you convince yourself to buy, right? They always tell you, nobody will tell you it's a lemon.
It's funny. I've used this example of sales before, and people have said, well, but I talk to salespeople all the time, and they try to get to know me, and I'm just trying to get to know the person. Yeah, okay, but actually, no, you're trying to get to know the company, and that's not the person. And generally speaking, interviewers are slightly uncomfortable in what they're doing, unless they do a lot of interviews. And the chances that they like you and don't learn anything about you and then say yes are virtually zero. If they'll like you, they'll like you. The idea that you can not talk about yourself, ask a bunch of questions about the company, have a chit chat, and then have them say, well, I like the guy. Well, what did you learn? Nothing. And so therefore I want to move him forward. No, that's not the way it works. So the sales analogy is a good one as long as you understand that you're the salesperson and you don't want to be talking about things that aren't relevant to the product, which is you.
Yeah. I came up with some examples for things that you might want to ask. There's only 3, but the first one I would think of is not weird. The third one verges on weird and would make me have second thoughts about a candidate. So they kind of go down a scale. So just think about that while I'm telling you. So one of the things you could say is, I'd love to accept this offer, and in the interest of fairness, I'd like to tell you I need to leave at 5 every day because my child is in daycare. If that's okay with you, then I'd be happy to join your team. Or, I'd love to accept this offer, and I had a really bad experience with a tiny broom cupboard office in a previous job. I know this is a really minor thing, but can you just tell me where I'll be working? If it's one of those offices I saw when we were interviewing, that would be great, and I'd love to take the offer.
Yeah.
Or even, I'd love to accept this offer. Before I do you mind if I talk to one of your team members and ask a couple of minor questions? I had a couple of bad experiences and I'd like to ask some really minor things, and I don't want to take any of your time up. And if you want to ask, where they go for lunch, then ask the team manager.
Yeah. And again, guys, this is only after you have an offer. Now, I will tell you that the 5 o'clock thing, you're not saying that of those 3 things, the third is weird and the other 2 are not. All 3 of them are well toward the end of the scale, right? Because there's no reasonable person who says, I would have to go home every day at 5 o'clock. I mean, because look, folks, no offense, your kids outrank your work. But if you have your child in a daycare, which requires you to be there at 5, I actually don't believe daycares like that exist.
No, there's usually a late fee, which you might want to avoid.
Yeah.
It's like the people that say, I have to put my children on the bus in the morning for school. No, you don't. Like, don't 15 children get on the bus at the same time? So there's other parents there. So if you really needed to, somebody else could put the child on the bus.
Yeah. That said, those are all questions that if you feel you want to ask that kind of question, we're not going to tell you not to. We would advise you against it. But those are really, I think, special cases. The point is, those are on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just asked that, I'm going to rescind the offer. Those are getting toward 7. But they're not 9s. And if those are the kinds of things you need to know, you can ask them. Because if you don't have that information, then you feel you can't make a decision. And I also think it's fair to say, okay, these are the things that concern me. Are they really black and white, per your point, Wendy? And another thing is, would you tolerate a company asking you those kinds of questions? And what most people say is, no, they can't ask that. So, well, then why are you asking the company that?
That's right.
If you feel like it may be inappropriate for them to ask you, maybe you just decide this company may not be right for me, which, by the way, is completely okay. Okay, Wendy, why don't you sum up?
Okay, so don't interview the interviewer, assess the company, and get an offer first.
Yeah, we don't interview the interviewer while we're being interviewed, right? Because the interviewer is the person talking to you when you're being interviewed. Assess the company separately through other ways. And remember, there are 2 parts to your job search: getting offers and taking offers. You cannot take offers you don't have. And the first part, getting an offer, is all about you, and it has nothing to do with the company. The company only matters if they give you an offer. And if you spend time asking them about themselves before they give you an offer, they may not have enough time to give you that offer. And so therefore they'll say no, and your questions will be moot anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope the next time you're in an interview, you don't think it's your turn to grill them.